Hey everyone, this video lesson is going to cover the material on run-ons and comma splices. So this is our second official grammar and mechanics lesson. Hopefully you've already looked over the first sub-tab or the first tab after the daily journal, which was on the useful words for grammar and mechanics, and watched that video, and then moved on to do the lesson on sentence fragments. This is our second official lesson, and it's almost the exact opposite of sentence fragments, right? So we're dealing with run-ons and comma splices. So if you think about what a fragment is, right, we learned that a fragment is an incomplete sentence. It's not enough. It's not strong enough. It needs to be connected or turned into a complete sentence. With a run-on sentence, we have the opposite problem. It's not that we don't have enough, we have too much. So we've got two or more complete sentences that are fused together incorrectly. So if you look at the handout, you'll see that we have three examples right at the top. So I'm going to read these three examples to you and then move on and explain why they're there. So we've got example number 1. Sarah did a great job. She was promoted. Example number 2. I got a speeding ticket last week. The cost of my insurance will probably go up. Number 3. My mother gave me permission. However, my father told me I could not use the car. Right? So what are these examples all about? Well, a run-on sentence, a straight traditional run-on sentence is example number 1. Sarah did a great job. She was promoted. It is basically two complete sentences that are fused together with nothing separating one sentence from the next. They just run right into each other. That's why it's called a run-on. One sentence runs on into the next. There's nothing separating them. That is a problem, right? You have to show in some way where the first complete thought ends and the next complete thought begins. So that leads us to our second issue, this thing called a comma splice. A comma splice is a run-on sentence. It's two or more sentences fused together. One is running right into the next. But in this case, there is something separating them, a comma. But that is not enough. A comma by itself is not strong enough to connect two complete sentences. So when you look at example number 2, I got a speeding ticket last week, comma, the cost of my insurance will probably go up. Those are two complete thoughts. I got a speeding ticket last week. Boom. The cost of my insurance will probably go up. Boom. We tried to separate them with just a comma. And a lot of you might look at that and think that it's correct, but it's not. It's what we call a comma splice. A comma splice is just a special type of run-on sentence. It gets its own special name, its own special subcategory within run-on sentences because it is such a common mistake. I see more run-on sentences that are caused by a comma splice than I do with just like the first example where one runs right into the next. Most of the time, a run-on sentence is caused by the comma splice. So if you learn nothing from grammar and mechanics this quarter going through this class, what I want to make sure you walk out of here with is that a comma by itself is not strong enough to join together two complete sentences. So the third example is also a comma splice. I gave it as a different, a separate example though, because it uses a conjunctive adverb, however. But if you just look at it, my mother gave me permission. Boom, that's one sentence. However, my father told me I could not use the car. Boom, second sentence. Now, some of you might look at that and think at first that that's correct because you might forget that the word however is a conjunctive adverb. And you might be thinking, you know, I remember that word from the list of useful words that we went over. And maybe it's a subordinating conjunction. And if it's a subordinating conjunction, then it would have turned that second sentence into a dependent clause that needed to stay connected to the first sentence. But just remember that the word however is a conjunctive adverb, and those words don't weaken either of the sentences. They can stand by themselves. So that's why that third example is a comma splice. The word however is the beginning of the next sentence, and it is a complete sentence. So that comma in between permission and however is wrong. It's not strong enough to keep those two sentences connected, right? So those three examples are three types of run-on sentences. The first example is a straight traditional run-on sentence. One complete sentence runs right into the next with nothing separating them. The second two examples, numbers 2 and 3, those are also run-on sentences, but they are a special type of run-on sentence called a comma splice, because a comma is not strong enough to join together two complete sentences. So how do we fix them, right? Hopefully you will get to a point where you're not making the error in your writing, but it's okay if you do. I mean, even professional writers probably still experience this error as they write. But the trick is to catch the mistake and then know how to fix it. So how do we fix them? I have listed on the handout 4 different ways that you can go about fixing this problem. The first way is obviously the easiest way. If you have 2 complete sentences running into each other, just separate them and make them 2 complete sentences. So Sarah did a great job, period. She was promoted. I got a speeding ticket last week, period. The cost of my insurance will probably go up. My mother gave me permission, period. However, my father told me I could not use the car. So that is the most obvious and the easiest way of fixing a run-on sentence or comma splice. But you don't want to use that method every time, because especially if you are someone who tends to have a lot of run-ons and comma splices, if you always fix them by doing it this way, you're going to end up with a bunch of short, choppy sentences, which will make your writing sound less college level. But also, you then take away the words that join your thoughts and show your reader how your ideas are connected to each other. So it is okay to use this method every once in a while, but you want to avoid overusing this method. So I want to focus on the other ways of fixing the run-ons and comma splices. The second way is also pretty easy. It's using a semicolon. So if this was the method we were going to use, the 3 examples would be fixed as you see on the handout. Sarah did a great job, semicolon, she was promoted. Remember, a semicolon is used to in between 2 complete sentences, but it allows them to stay together. So where a comma is not strong enough to do that, a semicolon is, right? So Sarah did a great job, semicolon, she was promoted. The S in she is still still lowercase because the semicolon is allowing the 2 sentences to remain together. I got a speeding ticket last week, semicolon, the cost of my insurance will probably go up. It's okay to use the semicolon in those 2 examples, but where you really want to use the semicolon, or where you will see it used most often, is with the third example. My mother gave me permission, semicolon, however, my father told me I could not use the car. If you remember when we looked at the list of useful words for grammar and mechanics, that third group of words, the conjunctive adverbs, remember I said they are strong enough to stand on their own, but we often use them to keep 2 sentences together by using a semicolon with it, because the 2 thoughts are so closely connected that you want them to remain as one. So I tend to save my semicolons for times when I'm using a conjunctive adverb because it just fits with how I'm wanting to express those two complete thoughts. Using the conjunctive adverb typically expresses that relationship really well. So I want to go ahead and use a semicolon to keep them together as one sentence. It's okay to use the semicolon in those first two examples with Sarah and the speeding ticket. But just like with our first example or our first method, you don't want to overuse this method either. You don't want your essays to be full of semicolons. You want to have some variety in how you're structuring your sentences and expressing the connections between your thoughts. So I always tell students, probably best to use the semicolon just with those conjunctive adverbs, maybe occasionally in other instances. But it is correct to use the semicolon to connect two complete sentences. Our third method also refers back to that list of words on the useful words handout. And this is using one of those coordinating conjunctions, right? So the coordinating conjunctions, remember there were only 7 fanboys. So if one of those 7 words appropriately expresses the relationship between your two sentences, you can use one of them to connect the two and leave them joined. Don't forget the comma though. This is the comma does work here, but only because you're using the coordinating conjunction with it, right? The comma by itself is not strong enough. The comma with the conjunction is strong enough. So Sarah did a great job, comma, and she was promoted. I got a speeding ticket last week, comma, so the cost of my insurance will probably go up. The third example with using the car, it already has the conjunctive adverb, so I personally would not change it and use a coordinating conjunction instead. I would fix it the way we did with the semicolon. But just to show you how you could change it and use a coordinating conjunction, you have it right there. My mother gave me permission, comma, but my father told me I could not use the car. So very popular way of combining complete sentences. Just, don't get confused about that comma though. Yes, we are using a comma here, but the reason we're able to do so is because we're using one of those coordinating conjunctions as well. And make sure that you're using one of those conjunctions that makes sense. It wouldn't make sense to say Sarah did a great job, comma, but she was promoted. That's not the correct relationship between those two thoughts. And just a little word here about those 7 coordinating conjunctions. There's one that's on there, the word for. For is typically used as a preposition. That's how we most often use that word. But when you're using it as a coordinating conjunction, it functions like the word because. Sounds very old-fashioned and antiquated, but that's how it works. You could say Sarah was promoted because she did a great job. You could also say Sarah was promoted, comma, for she did a great job. For functions like the word because. It sounds really strange. But it would work as a corrective measure for a run-on sentence, right? So we've got creating 2 separate sentences, the easiest, most obvious way of correcting a run-on or comma splice. But you don't want to overuse that. You don't want short, choppy sentences, and you want to make sure you're expressing the relationships between your thoughts. You can use a semicolon. It allows the 2 complete sentences to stay together. It is strong enough to do that. But I tend to save that method for when I'm using a conjunctive adverb. You can use a comma in a coordinating conjunction, right? The comma is okay here because you're using the coordinating conjunction with it. Make sure that you're choosing the coordinating conjunction that appropriately expresses the relationship between the 2 sentences. And you might not find one. There are only 7 of them. So what do you do then? You don't want all these short, choppy sentences. You don't want to overuse your semicolons. The conjunctions, the coordinating conjunctions, they're just not sounding right. then you can move on to the fourth method, which is a little more work, but is the most dynamic method, which is to take one of those complete sentences, use a subordinating conjunction to turn it into a weaker dependent clause, and then it can stay attached to the other complete sentence. So when we were dealing with fragments, the subordinating conjunctions were a red flag. Like, oh, I've used a subordinating conjunction. Maybe that's why I have a fragment. Maybe that's where I messed up. But that's why I said during the fragments lesson, don't be afraid of using the subordinating conjunctions, because they're really good for expressing our train of thought. You just have to do it correctly. And here with run-ons and comma splices, those subordinating conjunctions can help you fix your mistake, right? So for the first example, Sarah did a great job, she was promoted. You can use the subordinating conjunction because. Because Sarah did a great job, she was promoted. Now those two stay together, right? We used the weakening power of the subordinating conjunction to our advantage here. It didn't create a problem, it fixed one for us. The cost of my insurance will probably go up because I got a speeding ticket last week. Just stays right there together. And then again, I wouldn't necessarily mess with the third one about the permission to use the car because it has that conjunctive adverb. I just use the semicolon. But to show you how it would work, I do have the correction here with a subordinating conjunction. Although my mother gave me permission, my father told me I could not use the car. Right? So very, very common error in writing are those run-on sentences, specifically the comma splice. So remember, a comma by itself cannot join two complete sentences together. You have to have something stronger. So 4 ways that you can fix it. Just create 2 separate sentences, right? Easy. Use a semicolon. Easy. Keep the comma, but add a coordinating conjunction with it. Or take one of those complete sentences, use a subordinating conjunction that is appropriate, that makes sense, and keep it connected to the complete sentence. All of 4 of those methods are useful and good to use in certain situations, but you want to make sure that, especially for creating 2 separate sentences and using a semicolon, that you're not overdoing it. The comma in the coordinating conjunction, that's a little bit higher level, so using that one more often is okay, but the one you really want to get good at because it creates stronger writing is using the subordinating conjunctions to keep the 2 sentences together. You'll see after those 4 methods of correction, we have some practice sentences here. There is a run-on or comma splice in every one of them. And then underneath that, you'll see the answers, if you will. So the first step is making sure you understand where the mistake has occurred. So in the first practice example, this is a fairly new product, therefore some people don't trust it. Well, we've got 2 commas in there, so that might be an indication of where the problem is. Maybe we have a comma splice, right? This is a fairly new product, therefore some people don't trust it. We have 2 complete sentences there. This is a fairly new product, therefore some people don't trust it. So it looks like it's that first comma where we have found the problem. It is a comma splice. That comma by itself is not strong enough to keep those 2 sentences together. So how do we fix it? You could use any of the 4 methods, but in this case, if you look at the first word of the second sentence, therefore, that is a conjunctive adverb, like the word however. I personally would turn that first comma in between product and therefore, I would turn it into a semicolon, and I'm done. Like I said, I really like to save those semicolons when I use the conjunctive adverbs. So that's an easy fix right there. Number 2, efforts are being made to halt water pollution. However, there is no simple solution to the problem. So if you notice right away, we have another conjunctive adverb here. That's probably where our problem is. That's probably right around where we're going to find our issue, because that conjunctive adverb typically is at the beginning or towards the beginning of a complete sentence. So in this case, efforts are being made to halt water pollution. Boom. However, there is no simple solution to the problem. Boom. We have a comma splice here again. In between pollution and however, in between those two sentences, we just plugged in a comma. Not strong enough. But because this is a conjunctive adverb with however, I would use the semicolon again. So I would change that comma in between pollution and however to a semicolon. And if you want to get really technical, you would add a comma after the word however, because those conjunctive adverbs are typically set off by commas. If it's the first word of the sentence, then it's just one comma after it, obviously. So let's take a look at number 3, though. Bill slept through his final exam. He had forgotten to set his alarm. So we have to find where the first sentence ends and the second sentence begins. There's no punctuation in the middle here. So it is a straight traditional run-on sentence. We don't really have any clues to help us, focus. We have to figure it out. Bill slept through his final exam. We have another subject, so that might be an indication that we're starting a new sentence. Bill slept through his final exam. He had forgotten to set his alarm, right? Obviously, you could put a period after exam and capitalize the H and he, make it 2 separate sentences. You could put a semicolon in between exam and he. Could we use one of the 7 coordinating conjunctions here? You have to figure out what the relationship is between these two thoughts. He slept through his final exam. He forgot to set his alarm. Well, the reason he slept through his exam is because he forgot to set his alarm. So the coordinating conjunction that means the same thing as because, again, is for. Bill slept through his final exam, comma, for he had forgotten to set his alarm. Sounds weird, but it works. Or you could just use the word because as a subordinating conjunction and fix it that way. Bill slept through his final exam because he had forgotten to set his alarm, right? You can go through the rest of the examples, and like I said, underneath I have a little explanation of each one, like where the problem was and how you could fix it. If you have any questions about it, let me know. Otherwise, after you kind of finish looking over those practice examples, you can move on to the run-ons and comma splices exercise. So just like with the fragments exercise, when you get to that assignment, it is a text submission. So you will type your answers right into the text box. It is not in a Word document that you will upload. Right there in the box. You want to fix each run-on and comma splice. So find the error first and then type your corrected version underneath the sentence. Be sure that you use each of the 4 methods at least once. I know it's going to be very tempting to just create 2 separate sentences and use the semicolon because those are super easy. But use each method at least once. So at least once use a comma with a coordinating conjunction, and at least once use a subordinating conjunction to turn one of them into a dependent clause so that you can leave them joined together. And one final note, be sure that you're not creating a comma splice when you're fixing a run-on sentence. So, for example, the last one that we looked at there, Bill slept through his final exam. He had forgotten to set his alarm. if this was on the exercise, the graded exercise, if you fixed this by simply putting a comma in between exam and he, it would still be wrong. You have not fixed the run-on situation. You have just created a special kind of run-on. Now it's a comma splice. So if you're ever fixing run-on sentences and you find yourself going to just put in a comma, stop, hands up, right? Ask yourself, okay, I'm about to put a comma here. Am I also using a coordinating conjunction? Because if not, that comma should not be there, right? Or I'm about to put in a comma. Am I going to put a little dot over it also to make it a semicolon, right? Check yourself. If you feel that urge to just slap in a comma, check yourself, because the comma by itself will still be incorrect. If you have any questions about any of the run-ons and comma splices, let me know. Otherwise, good luck on the exercise. And after you finish that, you can move on to the next lesson, which is more review on description and narration.